I was celebrating my hard-earned promotion to Senior Marketing Director at Dataflow Solutions with my team when Madison Pierce walked in. The 24-year-old daughter of company founder Robert Pierce stood in the doorway wearing a designer blazer and the cruelest smile I'd ever seen. Without warning or explanation, she announced loudly that I was being demoted back to my old position. "Know your place," she said, her voice cutting through our celebration like a blade. The conference room fell silent. My colleagues avoided eye contact. HR claimed it was above their pay grade. In that moment, I realized this spoiled nepotism hire had just destroyed 3 years of career advancement in 60 seconds. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. 3 years ago, I walked into Dataflow Solutions as a 25-year-old marketing coordinator with nothing but student loan debt and determination. My apartment was a studio in Queens, where the radiator clanged all night and the neighbors upstairs practiced tap dancing at 2 a.m, but I had a plan. Dataflow Solutions specialized in data analytics software for mid-sized businesses. When I started, the marketing department consisted of 4 people crammed into a corner of the office using outdated software and strategies that belonged in the Stone Age. My first day, I watched our marketing director struggle to explain why our latest campaign had generated exactly 0 qualified leads. I threw myself into learning everything. Nights and weekends became my classroom. I taught myself advanced Google Analytics, Facebook advertising algorithms, and customer journey mapping. While my college friends were posting party photos on Instagram, I was studying conversion optimization videos on YouTube until my eyes burned. My breakthrough came during my first year when I noticed our email campaigns had terrible open rates. The company was sending generic newsletters that screamed, "Corporate robot wrote this." I proposed a complete overhaul, personalized content, segmented audiences, and compelling subject lines that actually made people curious instead of reaching for the delete button. The results spoke louder than any presentation. Our email engagement jumped from 8% to 32%. Lead quality improved so dramatically that our sales team actually thanked the marketing department for the first time in company history. Robert Pierce, the CEO, called me into his office and said I had real vision. That success led to bigger responsibilities. I redesigned our website, implemented marketing automation workflows, and created content strategies that position Dataflow as industry thought leaders instead of just another software vendor. Each campaign built on the last, creating momentum that transformed our company's reputation. The promotion to Senior Marketing Director should have been the natural next step. I'd earned it through results, innovation, and countless hours of dedication. My team respected me. Clients specifically requested to work with me. Industry peers invited me to speak at conferences. But 6 months ago, everything started changing in ways I couldn't quite understand at first. Madison Pierce arrived like a hurricane in designer heels. Robert introduced her as a marketing consultant who would bring fresh perspectives to our department. She had recently graduated from Northwestern with a communications degree and supposedly had innovative ideas about social media marketing and brand development. From day one, something felt wrong. Madison would sit in on my strategy meetings, taking notes and asking questions that revealed she understood nothing about our industry. She'd interrupt client calls to suggest campaigns that made no sense for our B2B audience. When I politely explained why certain approaches wouldn't work for data analytics software, she'd smile and nod, then schedule private meetings with her father. The sabotage started small. I'd present campaign results in team meetings, and Madison would chime in with comments like, "I actually had some input on that strategy," or "Dad and I discussed some modifications that really made it work." At first, I thought she was just trying to feel involved. Young employees often want to contribute beyond their experience level. Then I noticed my ideas appearing in Madison's presentations to senior leadership. The customer retention campaign I'd spent weeks developing suddenly became Madison's innovative approach to client lifecycle management. The competitive analysis I'd researched and written was presented as her initiative to understand market positioning. When I confronted her privately, Madison's response chilled me. She tilted her head with that same cruel smile and said, "I think you're feeling a bit territorial, Lorraine. This is a collaborative environment. Besides, I'm sure you understand that fresh perspectives are valuable here." The psychological warfare escalated. Madison began questioning my decisions in front of clients, suggesting that my strategies were too traditional for modern markets. She'd schedule conflicting meetings that forced me to choose between important client calls and team planning sessions. When I missed her impromptu brainstorming sessions because of client commitments, she'd tell Robert that I wasn't being a team player. Her college friends started appearing in junior marketing positions. Suddenly, I was managing people who whispered together in corners and seemed to know things about company decisions before I did. They'd challenge my directions, citing alternative approaches Madison had suggested. The dynamic in my own department shifted from collaborative energy to underlying tension that made everyone uncomfortable. The breaking point came when our biggest client, Harrison Industries, nearly canceled their contract because of campaign delays. I'd been working on their quarterly marketing plan when Madison inserted herself into the project, suggesting changes that required starting over completely. When the timeline got pushed back, Madison told Robert that I'd been resistant to feedback and inflexible about new ideas. I saved the Harrison account by working 18-hour days for a week, personally, calling their marketing director to rebuild trust and delivering a campaign that exceeded their expectations. The success should have vindicated me. Instead, Madison presented the final results to Robert as a collaborative effort where her fresh thinking had turned around my initial struggles. That presentation earned me the promotion to senior marketing director, or so I thought. What I didn't realize was that Madison had been building a case against me for months, painting me as someone who took credit for team efforts and created negative workplace dynamics. Every success became evidence of my supposed selfishness. Every time I disagreed with her suggestions, she documented it as proof of my bad attitude. The final piece of her strategy was genius in its simplicity. Madison convinced Robert that the promotion announcement should be a surprise celebration to boost team morale. She organized the meeting, invited the entire marketing department, and had catering brought in to make it feel like a proper celebration. I walked into that conference room believing I was about to officially receive recognition for 3 years of hard work. Instead, Madison had orchestrated the most humiliating professional moment of my life. In front of my entire team, she didn't just announce my demotion. She made it clear that I needed to know my place in the company hierarchy. The room's reaction told me everything. My colleagues wouldn't meet my eyes because they'd seen this coming. HR avoided my calls because they'd already been briefed on the decision. The catering setup turned my supposed celebration into a cruel joke that Madison had planned down to the last detail. As I sat in my newly assigned cubicle that afternoon, watching Madison rearrange furniture in what was supposed to be my corner office, I finally understood the depth of her strategy. This wasn't just about getting a promotion she didn't deserve. This was about destroying my reputation so thoroughly that no one would question her authority going forward. But Madison made one crucial mistake. She assumed that humiliating me publicly would break my spirit and make me accept defeat. Instead, it crystallized my resolve to understand exactly what I was dealing with and how far this corruption really went. The morning after my public demotion, I decided to fight back through proper channels. If Dataflow Solutions was a legitimate company with real policies, surely someone would listen to reason when I presented facts about Madison's qualifications and behavior. I scheduled a meetings with Patricia Walsh, our human resources director. Patricia had always seemed professional and fair during my 3 years at the company. She'd helped me navigate minor workplace issues before, and I hoped she'd be objective about this obvious case of nepotism and workplace bullying. Patricia's office felt different that morning. Usually welcoming and organized, it now seemed cold and formal. She sat behind her desk with my personnel file already open, her expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Lorraine, I understand you have concerns about yesterday's organizational changes." She began using corporate speak that turned my career destruction into a simple restructuring decision. I presented my case methodically. 3 years of excellent performance reviews, documentation of successful campaigns I'd led, client testimonials specifically praising my work, awards from industry organizations recognizing campaigns I'd developed. I had built an ironclad record of achievement that should have made my promotion undeniable. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and delivered a response that revealed how naive I'd been about the company's true nature. "Lorraine, you've certainly contributed to our marketing efforts. However, leadership effectiveness involves more than individual achievements. We've received feedback about your collaborative approach and openness to new ideas." The corporate doublespeak was masterful. Without directly accusing me of anything specific, Patricia was suggesting that my feedback problem justified the demotion. When I asked for details about who had provided this feedback and what specific incidents they were referring to, her answer revealed the scope of Madison's manipulation. "I'm not at liberty to share specific sources, but multiple team members have expressed concerns about workplace dynamics. Madison has been particularly helpful in identifying areas where our department culture could improve." The picture became crystal clear. Madison had positioned herself as the solution to problems she'd created. By questioning my decisions, undermining my authority, and encouraging her college friends to challenge my leadership, she'd manufactured evidence of poor team dynamics. Then she'd presented herself to Patricia and Robert as someone who could restore harmony to a dysfunctional department. I attempted to explain Madison's lack of qualifications and experience. She had never managed a marketing campaign from start to finish. Her understanding of our industry was superficial at best. Her suggestions consistently ignored basic principles of B2B marketing that any qualified professional would understand. Patricia's response was a masterclass in dismissing legitimate concerns while appearing reasonable. "Lorraine, I think you might be viewing this situation through the lens of territorial feelings. Madison brings fresh energy and innovative thinking to our team. Sometimes experience can create blind spots that prevent us from seeing new opportunities." The conversation deteriorated from there. Patricia suggested that my adjustment period to working under Madison's leadership would be easier if I approached the situation with more openness and less resistance. She recommended that I focus on being a supportive team member rather than dwelling on hierarchical concerns. As I left Patricia's office, I realized that HR wasn't going to help because HR was part of the problem. Patricia either genuinely believed Madison's version of events, or she was deliberately protecting Robert Pierce's family member regardless of the facts. That afternoon, I decided to investigate further into how the company really operated. If Madison's promotion was based on merit, there should be documentation of her achievements and qualifications. If Patricia's concerns about my performance were legitimate, there should be specific examples and improvement plans in my personnel file. What I discovered through careful research painted a disturbing picture of Data Flow Solutions' true culture. Madison's college friends hadn't been hired based on their marketing skills. They were communications majors with no relevant experience who'd been given positions that typically required at least 2 years of industry background. Their hiring had bypassed the normal interview process that other candidates went through. More troubling, I learned that several experienced employees had left the company over the past 6 months. Jenny Morrison, our former senior account manager, had quit without explanation after 15 years with Dataflow. Marcus Chen, a talented graphic designer, had found another job despite receiving positive performance reviews. When I reached out to former colleagues, they were reluctant to discuss their reasons for leaving, but their discomfort suggested they'd experienced similar treatment. The financial picture also raised questions. Dataflow Solutions had been profitable and growing steadily for years, but recent decisions seemed focused more on image than results. Madison had convinced Robert to invest in expensive rebranding efforts and trendy marketing tools that didn't align with our client base or business model. The budget allocations favored flashy initiatives over proven strategies that generated actual revenue. My investigation took an alarming turn when I overheard a phone conversation that revealed the company's real financial situation. I was working late updating client reports in my cubicle when Patricia's voice carried from her office during what she clearly thought was a private call. Phase 1 cleanup needs to happen before the quarterly review, Patricia was saying. We need documented justification for the changes, especially with the older employees who might push back. I moved closer to Patricia's office, pretending to retrieve files from a nearby cabinet. Her conversation continued, and each word made my blood run colder. Madison's approach is working perfectly. By identifying problem employees and documenting performance issues, we can streamline the department without raising legal concerns. Lorraine's resistance to feedback gives us exactly the paper trail we need. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Dataflow Solutions wasn't just playing favorites with Robert Pierce's daughter. The company was planning systematic layoffs disguised as performance-based terminations. Madison's role wasn't just to take over the marketing department. She was identifying employees who might resist the new direction and creating justification for their elimination. My demotion wasn't punishment for poor performance. It was the first step in building a case for my termination. Patricia's suggestion that I focus on being supportive wasn't advice for professional growth. It was a test to see if I would quietly accept my reduced role or continue to challenge decisions, giving them more evidence of my difficult attitude. The financial pressure driving these decisions became clear when I reviewed our client retention numbers. Several major accounts had reduced their contracts over the past quarter. New client acquisition had slowed dramatically. The expensive rebranding initiatives Madison had championed were draining resources without generating measurable returns. Robert Pierce was facing a crisis he didn't want to acknowledge publicly. Rather than admitting that his daughter's inexperience was contributing to client dissatisfaction, he was planning to blame performance problems on employee resistance and departmental dysfunction. Madison would emerge as the solution who had tried to improve things while dealing with uncooperative colleagues. The scope of their strategy was breathtaking in its cynicism. They weren't just protecting Madison's position. They were using her as a tool to justify downsizing while avoiding responsibility for the company's real problems. Experienced employees who understood the industry would be replaced by cheaper, less qualified workers who would follow Madison's directions without question. As I absorbed the full implications of what I'd discovered, my anger transformed into something more strategic. Madison and her father had underestimated me just as much as I'd initially underestimated them. They saw me as a threat to be eliminated through manipulation and corporate politics. But they'd made a crucial error in their assessment. I wasn't just a dedicated employee with hurt feelings about unfair treatment. I was someone who understood how marketing really worked, how business relationships were built, and how reputations were created and destroyed. If they wanted to play games with my career, I was prepared to show them what a real strategic campaign looked like. The question was no longer whether I could save my job at Dataflow Solutions. The question was whether I could expose their corruption before they destroyed other people's careers and ultimately drove the company into the ground through their incompetence and greed. The professional humiliation was devastating enough, but Madison's campaign against me didn't stop at the office. Within days of my demotion, I discovered that her influence was spreading into every aspect of my life, targeting relationships and opportunities I'd spent years building. My boyfriend Jake worked in sales at TechFlow Systems, one of Dataflow's competitors. We'd met 2 years earlier at an industry networking event and had carefully navigated the potential conflicts of dating someone from a rival company. Our relationship was built on mutual respect for each other's professional achievements and understanding of the competitive technology sector. Jake's behavior changed immediately after my demotion became industry gossip. Our usual Wednesday dinner dates became rushed affairs, where he seemed distracted and uncomfortable. He stopped asking about my work, which had always been a source of engaging conversation between us. When I tried to discuss the unfair treatment I was experiencing, he would change the subject or suggest we talk about something more positive. The distance between us became undeniable when Jake canceled our weekend plans 3 times in a row. Each excuse sounded reasonable in isolation: unexpected client meetings, family obligations, work deadlines that couldn't be postponed. But the pattern revealed something more troubling than simple scheduling conflicts. My suspicions crystallized at the monthly Technology Marketing Association mixer. These events had always been highlights of my professional calendar, opportunities to connect with peers, share industry insights, and build relationships that benefited both my career and my company. I'd attended regularly for 2 years and had developed genuine friendships with marketers from across the sector. That night's reception felt like entering a room where everyone had received a memo I hadn't seen. Conversations stopped when I approached groups of colleagues. People who usually greeted me warmly suddenly found their drinks or their phones desperately interesting when they saw me coming. The networking that usually energized me became an exercise in social isolation that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my professional reputation. The most painful moment came when Sarah Rodriguez, a marketing director I'd collaborated with on several industry panels, actually turned away when I approached her table. Sarah and I had shared coffee dozens of times, discussing everything from campaign strategies to work-life balance challenges. Her deliberate avoidance felt like a physical blow. I finally cornered David Chang, a friend who worked at a marketing agency that often partnered with Dataflow Solutions. David had always been direct and honest, qualities that made his friendship valuable even when his feedback was difficult to hear. "David, what's going on? People are treating me like I have a contagious disease." His discomfort was obvious as he glanced around the room before answering. "Lorraine, there are rumors going around about your situation at Dataflow. People are saying you had performance issues and attitude problems that led to the demotion." The scope of Madison's character assassination became clear. She hadn't just convinced Robert Pierce and Patricia Walsh that I was a problematic employee. She'd been spreading that narrative throughout our professional community, using her father's industry connections to poison my reputation with people who had never worked directly with me. David's next revelation hit even harder. "Madison Pierce has been very active in the networking circuit lately. She's been presenting herself as someone who's trying to modernize Dataflow's marketing approach while dealing with resistance from legacy employees who don't want to adapt to new strategies." The genius of Madison's narrative was its sophistication. She wasn't directly attacking my character or qualifications. Instead, she was positioning herself as an innovative leader trying to bring positive change to a company held back by employees who couldn't embrace evolution. My resistance to her ideas became evidence of my inability to adapt to modern marketing approaches. The personal cost became devastatingly clear when I attempted to reach out to Jake that evening after the networking event. He finally agreed to meet me for coffee, but his demeanor was unlike anything I'd experienced in our 2-year relationship.
Lorraine, I need to be honest with you about something.
Jake began avoiding eye contact in a way that immediately signaled bad news. TechFlow Systems is exploring a potential partnership with Dataflow Solutions. The conversations have been very promising, and this could be a significant opportunity for my career. The connection between Jake's distance and Madison's campaign against me became crystal clear.
What does that have to do with us, Jake?
His answer revealed the depth of Madison's strategy.
Madison Pierce has been involved in the preliminary discussions.
She mentioned that you've been having some workplace challenges that might affect your judgment and decision-making. She suggested that your personal relationships could complicate the business discussions if there are conflicts of interest. Madison had identified every important relationship in my life and systematically undermined them by suggesting that my professional problems reflected deeper personal issues. She'd convinced Jake that staying close to me could damage his career prospects if the partnership moved forward. The conversation with Jake became increasingly painful as he revealed more details. Madison had painted a picture of me as someone who was struggling to accept feedback and becoming increasingly isolated from my colleagues. She'd suggested that I might try to use personal relationships to gather competitive information or influence business decisions inappropriately.
I can't afford to have my professional reputation questioned right now,
Jake concluded.
The partnership discussions are too important for my company and my career. I think we need to take a break until your situation at Dataflow gets resolved.
The breakup felt like the final piece of Madison's comprehensive destruction of my life. She'd taken my job, my professional reputation, and now my personal relationship. The isolation was complete and devastating. That night alone in my apartment, I forced myself to confront the full scope of what Madison had accomplished in just 6 months. She'd identified every source of confidence and support in my life and systematically attacked them using a combination of lies, manipulation, and strategic positioning that was impressive in its thoroughness. But as I sat there processing the devastation, I began to see patterns in Madison's approach that revealed both her strengths and her potential vulnerabilities. Her campaign against me was working because she understood how to use people's ambitions and insecurities against them. Patricia Walsh wanted to avoid conflict with Robert Pierce. Jake wanted to protect his career opportunities. Industry colleagues wanted to avoid association with someone who might be professionally toxic. Madison's power came from her ability to control narratives and information. People believed her version of events because she presented them confidently and because her father's position gave her credibility. But that same dependence on perception and status could also be a weakness if someone exposed the reality behind her carefully constructed image. The question was whether I had the strength and strategy to fight back against someone who had already demonstrated such devastating effectiveness at destroying lives. Madison had every advantage: family connections, financial resources, and a network of people who had reasons to support her version of events. But I had something Madison couldn't fully understand or replicate: genuine expertise, authentic relationships built over years of consistent performance, and the kind of detailed knowledge about how business really worked that came from earning success rather than inheriting it. The personal devastation was complete, but it also clarified something important about the choice I faced. I could accept defeat and try to rebuild my career somewhere else, carrying the damage Madison had done to my reputation. Or I could fight back with the same strategic thinking and comprehensive approach that had made me successful in marketing. Madison had declared war on my life using every advantage at her disposal. The question was whether she was prepared for what would happen when someone with real skills decided to fight back using everything she'd taught me about the power of strategic planning and careful execution. The final humiliation came during what should have been a routine client presentation. Harrison Industries had scheduled their quarterly review meeting, and I'd spent weeks preparing comprehensive campaign performance data and strategic recommendations for the coming quarter. Despite my demotion, I still maintained the relationship with Harrison's marketing director, Linda Walsh, who had specifically requested that I continue as their primary contact. Madison decided to insert herself into the presentation at the last minute. She scheduled a pre-meeting conference call with Robert Pierce and insisted on being included as the senior marketing strategist who would provide strategic overview while I handled the tactical details. The arrangement was another calculated humiliation designed to demonstrate the new hierarchy to both our client and our internal team. Linda Walsh arrived at Dataflow's conference room with her usual professional demeanor, but I could see her confusion as Madison took the lead position at the head of the table. Linda had worked with me exclusively for 18 months and had never met Madison despite their preliminary phone conversations. Madison's presentation was a disaster from the first slide. She had taken my carefully researched recommendations and reframed them using marketing jargon that sounded impressive, but made no sense in the context of Harrison's business model. When Linda asked specific questions about implementation timelines and budget allocations, Madison provided vague answers that revealed her complete lack of understanding about the account's history and requirements. The breaking point came when Madison contradicted my explanation of a successful campaign we'd completed the previous quarter. She interrupted my detailed analysis to suggest that the results could have been better if we'd used more innovative approaches to customer engagement optimization. Linda's patience finally broke. "I'm sorry, but I'm confused about who's actually managing our account. Lorraine has been our primary contact for over a year, and we've been very satisfied with her strategic thinking and execution. This new approach seems to ignore everything we've discussed about our target market and business objectives." Madison's response revealed the depths of her arrogance and inexperience. Instead of acknowledging Linda's concerns, she doubled down on her supposed expertise. "I appreciate your loyalty to previous approaches, but Dataflow Solutions is evolving our methodology to incorporate more contemporary thinking about brand engagement and customer journey optimization." The room fell silent as Linda processed Madison's condescending response. I watched 18 months of careful relationship building crumble as our client realized she was being treated like someone who didn't understand her own business needs. Linda closed her laptop and gathered her materials with the kind of deliberate calm that every sales professional recognizes as the prelude to losing an account. "I think we need to reassess our partnership with Dataflow Solutions. Lorraine, I'll be in touch with you directly about transitioning our current campaigns." After Linda left, Madison's reaction was predictably narcissistic. Instead of acknowledging her role in alienating our client, she blamed me for undermining her authority and creating confusion about the account management structure. She scheduled an immediate meeting with Robert Pierce to discuss my sabotage of an important client relationship. That afternoon, sitting in my cubicle while Madison met with her father about my supposed insubordination, I reached my emotional breaking point. 3 years of building expertise, relationships, and reputation had been systematically destroyed by someone whose only qualification was genetic luck. The injustice felt overwhelming and absolute. I began clearing out my computer files, preparing for what seemed like inevitable termination. As I organized documents and deleted personal files, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I understood about Madison and Dataflow Solutions. While backing up my work files, I noticed unusual activity logs in our shared marketing database. Someone had been accessing my project's email communications and strategic planning documents using administrative privileges. The timestamps showed consistent late-night access to files I'd been working on, including confidential client information and campaign strategies I hadn't yet shared with anyone. Madison had been monitoring my work in real time, reading my emails, and stealing my ideas before I could present them. Her ability to anticipate my suggestions and take credit for my strategies wasn't just luck or coincidence. She'd been systematically spying on my computer activity, using her father's administrative access to company systems. The discovery led me to investigate further into Dataflow's digital infrastructure. What I found was far more disturbing than simple corporate espionage. Madison and Robert Pierce were running a sophisticated billing fraud operation that had been stealing from clients for months. The evidence was hidden in project management software that tracked time and services for client accounts. I discovered that Dataflow had been charging premium rates for services they never provided, billing for consultations that never happened, and inflating hours worked on projects by as much as 50%. Harrison Industries, the client Madison had just alienated, had been paying for 20 hours of strategic consulting per month, but receiving only basic account management. The invoices showed detailed descriptions of market research and competitive analysis that had never been conducted. The billing system included fake testimonials and fabricated case studies that made Dataflow's services appear more comprehensive than they actually were. The fraud extended beyond simple overbilling. Madison had been creating fictitious consulting projects and charging clients for proprietary research that was actually copied from free industry reports. She'd invented specialized services with impressive names like customer journey architecture and brand engagement optimization that were just repackaged versions of standard marketing practices. The most shocking discovery was the personal financial component. Madison was receiving substantial bonuses based on these inflated billings, essentially profiting directly from defrauding clients. Robert Pierce had created a compensation structure that rewarded his daughter for generating revenue, regardless of whether the services were actually provided. The documentation was comprehensive and damning. Email communications between Madison and Robert discussed strategies for maximizing billable hours without increasing actual work. Spreadsheets tracked the difference between real services and billed services across dozens of client accounts. The fraud totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars over 6 months. As I absorbed the implications of what I'd discovered, I realized that Madison's campaign against me wasn't just about nepotism or workplace politics. She was eliminating anyone who might discover or expose their criminal activity. My expertise and attention to detail made me a threat to their operation because I understood enough about marketing to recognize when services weren't being delivered. The systematic removal of experienced employees suddenly made sense. Anyone with enough knowledge to question billing practices or service delivery was being labeled as problematic and targeted for elimination. Madison's college friends were perfect replacements because they lacked the experience to recognize fraud, even if they witnessed it directly. But discovering the fraud also revealed Madison's critical vulnerability. Her entire operation depended on maintaining the illusion of competence while her father provided protection from consequences. If someone exposed both her incompetence and her criminality simultaneously, the protection wouldn't be enough to save her. For the first time since my demotion, I felt something other than despair and rage. I felt the cold clarity that comes from understanding exactly what you're fighting and exactly what weapons you have available. Madison had declared war on my career and my life, but she'd also given me everything I needed to destroy her completely. The question was no longer whether I could fight back. The question was whether I was prepared to do what was necessary to expose corruption that was stealing from clients, defrauding the government, and destroying the careers of innocent employees. Madison had taught me that half measures and playing by the rules weren't enough when dealing with people who had no conscience and no limits. If I wanted to stop her, I would need to be just as strategic, just as comprehensive, and just as ruthless as she had been in targeting me. But unlike Madison, I wouldn't need to rely on lies, manipulation, or family connections. I had something much more powerful. The truth backed up by documentation that would stand up in court and destroy everyone involved in the conspiracy. The discovery of Madison's fraud changed everything about my situation and my strategy. This wasn't just workplace bullying or nepotism anymore. This was criminal activity that was stealing from clients and could land everyone involved in federal prison. But exposing the fraud required careful planning because Madison and Robert Pierce would have opportunities to destroy evidence and blame their crimes on other employees if they saw the investigation coming. I spent that evening creating a comprehensive plan that would gather irrefutable evidence while protecting myself from retaliation. The key was building a case so thorough and well documented that no amount of family influence or corporate spin could explain it away. My first step was securing copies of all the evidence I'd discovered. Using my legitimate access to marketing files and project databases, I methodically downloaded documentation of fraudulent billing, fake service descriptions, and internal communications about the scheme. Every email, every spreadsheet, every invoice that proved their criminal activity was saved to multiple secure locations. The process took 3 days of staying late and working carefully to avoid detection. I disguised my evidence gathering as routine file organization and project archiving activities that were normal parts of my job responsibilities. Anyone monitoring my computer activity would see standard work patterns rather than suspicious behavior. But gathering evidence was only the first phase of my strategy. I needed to understand Madison's vulnerabilities and create pressure points that would force her to make mistakes while being investigated. Her arrogance and inexperience were her greatest weaknesses, but I needed to exploit them strategically rather than just hoping she would self-destruct. My research into Madison's background revealed a crucial piece of information that changed my entire approach. While investigating her supposed qualifications, I discovered that Madison Pierce had never actually graduated from Northwestern University. According to the registrar's office, she had completed 3.5 years of coursework, but had failed to finish her senior thesis and 2 required marketing courses. Madison had been living a lie that went beyond simple exaggeration of her qualifications. She was representing herself as a college graduate when she was actually a dropout who had never completed her degree. Robert Pierce apparently believed his daughter had earned her communications degree and had based her authority in the company on credentials she didn't possess. This discovery explained Madison's desperate need to eliminate anyone who might investigate her background or question her expertise. She wasn't just protecting her position in the family business. She was protecting herself from exposure as someone who had built her entire professional identity on a fundamental lie. The psychological pressure of maintaining this deception also explained some of Madison's most aggressive behavior. Every time someone questioned her strategies or challenged her authority, she faced the possibility that deeper investigation might reveal her lack of legitimate qualifications. Her attacks on experienced employees weren't just about consolidating power. They were about eliminating anyone who might dig too deeply into her credentials or demand evidence of her supposed expertise. Armed with this information, I began developing a multi-phase strategy that would expose both Madison's fraud and her fundamental dishonesty while protecting me from retaliation. The plan required patience and precision, but it offered the possibility of complete victory rather than just stopping the immediate attacks on my career. Phase 1 involved documenting Madison's ongoing incompetence in ways that would be impossible to ignore or explain away. I started recording conversations where she revealed her ignorance about basic marketing principles. Using my phone's voice memo function, I captured her making promises to clients about services she couldn't deliver and strategies that made no sense for their industries. Madison's arrogance made this documentation easy to gather. She loved talking about her innovative ideas and frequently held impromptu meetings where she would explain her vision for transforming Dataflow's marketing approach. These sessions became gold mines of recorded evidence, showing her complete lack of understanding about customer acquisition, brand positioning, and campaign measurement. Phase 2 focused on building relationships with people who could provide external verification of Madison's behavior and its impact on the company. I reached out to former employees who had left Dataflow Solutions over the past 6 months, carefully explaining that I was documenting workplace issues for potential legal action. The responses were illuminating and heartbreaking. Jenny Morrison, the former senior account manager, revealed that Madison had systematically undermined her relationships with long-term clients by suggesting that Jenny's approaches were outdated and ineffective. Marcus Chen, the talented graphic designer, had been told that his design aesthetic wasn't contemporary enough for Madison's vision of the company's brand evolution. Each former employee had their own story of being targeted, isolated, and eventually forced out by Madison's campaign to surround herself with people who wouldn't question her authority or competence. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. Identify experienced employees who might challenge her, undermine their relationships and confidence, then create justification for their elimination. But the most valuable intelligence came from current employees who were willing to speak confidentially about what they'd witnessed. Madison's college friends, despite their loyalty to her personally, were uncomfortable with some of the practices they'd observed. They provided information about billing discrepancies, fake project descriptions, and Madison's admitted ignorance about clients' actual business needs. Phase 3 involved creating opportunities for Madison to expose herself through her own actions. I suggested to Robert Pierce that we organize a comprehensive client presentation where Madison could demonstrate her strategic thinking to our most important accounts. The proposal was framed as a way to showcase the department's new direction under Madison's leadership. Robert loved the idea because it would give Madison a high-profile opportunity to prove her value to the company. Madison embraced it because it fed her ego and her desire to be recognized as a marketing visionary. Neither of them realized that I was creating a setting where Madison's incompetence would be impossible to hide or explain away. The presentation was scheduled for the following month, giving me time to ensure that key clients, industry colleagues, and even potential investigators would be aware of the event. I positioned it as a significant moment for Dataflow Solutions, where new leadership would reveal innovative strategies for the coming year. But the most critical element of my strategy was establishing contact with the appropriate authorities who could investigate the fraud I'd discovered. This required careful research into which agencies handled corporate billing fraud and how to present evidence in ways that would trigger serious investigation rather than bureaucratic delays. I learned that the State Attorney General's office had a specific unit dedicated to investigating fraudulent business practices. They were particularly interested in cases involving systematic deception of multiple victims and situations where companies used false credentials or services to justify inflated billing. My evidence package for the Attorney General's office was meticulously organized and professionally presented. I included documentation of the billing fraud, copies of fake service descriptions, evidence of Madison's false academic credentials, and testimony from former employees about the pattern of misconduct at Dataflow Solutions. The investigation request was submitted anonymously through the Attorney General's online reporting system, but I included detailed contact information for follow-up and offered to provide additional evidence or testimony as needed. The submission was designed to trigger a formal investigation while protecting my identity until I was ready to go public with everything I'd discovered. As I completed the groundwork for exposing Madison and her father, I felt a sense of strategic satisfaction that reminded me why I'd been successful in marketing. Building a comprehensive campaign that would achieve specific objectives through careful planning and execution was exactly the kind of challenge that had always energized me professionally. Madison had tried to destroy my career by outmaneuvering me through family connections and corporate politics. But she'd underestimated what would happen when someone with real strategic thinking decided to treat her destruction as a professional project, requiring the same level of planning and execution that had made me successful in legitimate marketing campaigns. The trap was set, the evidence was secured, and the investigation was beginning. All that remained was watching Madison and her father walk into the comprehensive destruction of their own making while believing they had successfully eliminated the one person capable of exposing their crimes. The comprehensive client presentation became the centerpiece of my strategy to expose Madison's incompetence and criminality in a way that would be impossible to ignore or cover up. I spent 2 weeks carefully orchestrating every detail of what Madison believed would be her triumphant demonstration of marketing leadership, but was actually her professional execution. The first phase involved reaching out to Harrison Industries with an offer they couldn't refuse. Linda Walsh had been frustrated with the dysfunction she'd witnessed during our disastrous meeting, but she was also reluctant to completely abandon a business relationship that had been valuable before Madison's interference. I proposed a private meeting where we could discuss their account concerns without the complications of internal company politics. Linda agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown away from any data flow offices. Her willingness to have this conversation confirmed what I'd suspected. She wanted to maintain the working relationship we'd built, but needed assurance that the service quality issues could be resolved. "Lorraine, I've been working with B2B marketing firms for 15 years, Linda began. I can tell when someone understands my business and when someone is just throwing around buzzwords. Madison's approach doesn't make sense for our industry or our customer base." This was the opening I needed to present Linda with evidence of the broader problems at Data Flow Solutions. Without revealing the full scope of what I'd discovered, I showed her documentation of billing discrepancies and service delivery failures that affected her account specifically. "Linda, I think you need to review your invoices very carefully. Some of the services you're being charged for may not have been delivered as described." Her reaction was immediate and intense. Linda had been trusting Dataflow's billing because of our established relationship, but she'd never conducted a detailed audit of services received versus services charged. When I showed her the discrepancies, I documented her professional demeanor shifted to barely controlled anger. "Are you telling me we've been overcharged for months? I'm telling you that you should request detailed documentation of every billable hour and every service described in your invoices. You have the right to verify that you received what you paid for." Linda's investigation of Harrison Industries' account became the external pressure I needed to force Madison and Robert Pierce into defensive positions. When Linda demanded comprehensive documentation of services provided, they would either have to admit the fraud or create even more false documentation that would deepen their legal exposure. Simultaneously, I was building relationships with regulatory agencies that could investigate Data Flow Solutions' business practices. The State Attorney General's office had responded to my evidence submission by assigning an investigator to review the case. Detective Sarah Martinez specialized in corporate fraud cases and was particularly interested in situations involving false credentials and systematic billing deception. My conversations with Detective Martinez were conducted through encrypted communications and anonymous reporting systems, but she made it clear that the evidence I'd provided was substantial enough to justify a formal investigation. She was particularly interested in the pattern of targeting experienced employees who might discover fraudulent practices.
This kind of systematic fraud usually involves multiple victims and ongoing criminal activity, Detective Martinez explained during one of our secure phone conversations. If you're willing to provide testimony and additional evidence, we can build a case that would result in serious criminal charges.
The investigation created opportunities to gather even more evidence while Madison and Robert Pierce remained unaware of the scrutiny they were facing. Detective Martinez obtained warrants to review Dataflow's financial records and client communications, uncovering additional instances of fraudulent billing that extended beyond what I'd initially discovered. But the most crucial element of my strategy required creating a situation where Madison would incriminate herself in real time while being recorded by law enforcement. This meant orchestrating a scenario where she would commit fraud while believing she was impressing a potential client. I approached Detective Martinez with a proposal for a controlled operation that would give Madison an opportunity to demonstrate her fraudulent practices to undercover investigators. The plan involved setting up a fake client meeting where Madison would likely promise services that didn't exist and bill for consultations that would never happen. We need someone to pose as a decision maker from a large company that's looking for comprehensive marketing services, I explained to Detective Martinez. Madison's arrogance and inexperience will make her promise things she can't deliver, especially if she thinks she's impressing a high-value prospect. Detective Martinez loved the idea because it would provide video and audio evidence of Madison attempting to commit fraud while knowing she was being recorded. The operation required coordination between the Attorney General's office, the state police, and federal investigators who were interested in the interstate nature of some of Dataflow's client relationships. The fake client was identified as Trans Global Manufacturing, a fictitious company that claimed to be expanding into new markets and needed comprehensive marketing strategy development. The supposed CEO, actually an undercover investigator named Thomas Bradley, contacted Dataflow Solutions directly and requested a presentation of their capabilities and service offerings. Madison's response to the inquiry was exactly what I'd predicted. She immediately positioned herself as the strategic lead who would personally oversee any relationship with such a significant client. Robert Pierce was thrilled about the potential for landing a major account that could offset some of their recent client losses. The presentation was scheduled for Dataflow's main conference room, the same space where Madison had publicly humiliated me weeks earlier. The irony of using that location for her downfall felt like poetic justice that validated everything I'd endured during her campaign against me. Detective Martinez and her team prepared for the operation by researching every detail of Trans Global Manufacturing's supposed business model and industry challenges. The undercover investigators would be able to ask sophisticated questions that would test Madison's knowledge and create opportunities for her to make fraudulent promises about services and capabilities. The goal is to let her talk herself into criminal charges, Detective Martinez explained during our final planning session. We'll ask questions that a real client would ask, and she'll either admit her limitations or lie about her capabilities. Either way, we'll have evidence of her fraudulent business practices. The day before the presentation, I made sure that key stakeholders would be aware of its significance without knowing its true purpose. I mentioned to Patricia Walsh that Madison was presenting to a potentially major client, ensuring that HR would be monitoring the results. I suggested to Robert Pierce that industry colleagues might be interested in learning about Dataflow's new strategic direction under Madison's leadership. The trap was comprehensive and inescapable. Madison would walk into the presentation believing she was demonstrating her value to a significant prospective client. Instead, she would be providing law enforcement with evidence of fraud, false credentials, and deceptive business practices while being recorded from multiple angles. Every element of her downfall would be captured on video. Her lies about her qualifications, her promises of services that didn't exist, her attempts to bill for consultations that would never happen, and her complete ignorance about the marketing strategies she claimed to have developed. But the most satisfying aspect of the trap was that Madison's own arrogance and desperation would drive her to provide more evidence than investigators had even hoped to gather. Her need to impress the fake client and justify her position at Dataflow would compel her to make increasingly outrageous claims about her expertise and her company's capabilities. As I prepared for the presentation that would end Madison's reign of terror, I felt a sense of professional satisfaction that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with marketing in the first place. Building a comprehensive campaign that achieved specific objectives through strategic planning and flawless execution was exactly the kind of challenge that had always brought out my best work. Madison had tried to destroy my career through lies, manipulation, and family influence. But she'd never understood that real marketing expertise involved understanding human psychology, predicting behavioral patterns, and creating situations where people revealed their true nature under pressure. The presentation would be Madison's final lesson in what strategic thinking actually looked like when applied by someone who understood the difference between real competence and inherited privilege. The morning of the presentation arrived with the crisp clarity that comes before life-changing events. Madison walked into Dataflow Solutions wearing a new designer suit and radiating the confidence of someone who believed she was about to secure the biggest client of her career. She had no idea that she was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap that would destroy everything she had stolen and expose every lie she had told. I arrived early to ensure that every technical detail was perfect. The conference room was equipped with recording devices that would capture both audio and video from multiple angles. Detective Martinez and her team had positioned themselves as members of Trans Global Manufacturing's evaluation committee, each prepared with sophisticated questions designed to test Madison's knowledge and create opportunities for her to incriminate herself. Robert Pierce joined the meeting to demonstrate the company's commitment to landing such a significant account. His presence would ensure that both father and daughter would be recorded, participating in fraudulent representations about their company's capabilities and credentials. Madison's presentation began exactly as I had predicted. She introduced herself as Dataflow Solutions Director of Strategic Marketing Innovation, a title she had apparently created that morning to sound more impressive to the prospective client. Her opening slides were filled with industry buzzwords and vague promises that sounded sophisticated but offered no specific deliverables. Trans Global Manufacturing represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking organization that would benefit from our proprietary customer journey architecture methodology. Madison announced using terminology she had invented to describe services that didn't actually exist. Thomas Bradley, the undercover investigator posing as Trans Global's CEO, asked the first pointed question that began Madison's unraveling. Can you explain specifically how this customer journey architecture differs from standard marketing automation workflows? What unique value does your methodology provide? Madison's answer revealed her complete lack of understanding about the services she was claiming to offer. She provided a rambling explanation about synergistic touchpoint optimization and behavioral engagement matrices that impressed no one except her father, who nodded approvingly despite the obvious nonsense. The questions became progressively more specific and technical, designed to force Madison to either admit her ignorance or dig herself deeper into fraudulent claims. She chose the latter, making increasingly outrageous promises about Dataflow's capabilities and her personal expertise. Our team has developed advanced analytics platforms that provide insights unavailable through traditional marketing software. Madison claimed describing technology that didn't exist and capabilities that would have required years of development and millions of dollars in investment. Detective Martinez, posing as TransGlobal's marketing director, asked about Madison's educational background and professional credentials. This question triggered the most damaging part of Madison's presentation, as she confidently lied about her qualifications while being recorded by multiple devices. I completed my marketing degree at Northwestern University with a focus on digital analytics and consumer psychology. My senior thesis on cross-platform engagement optimization has been cited in several industry publications. Every word was a documentable lie that would be verified during the investigation. Madison was not just claiming credentials she didn't possess. She was inventing academic achievements that could be easily disproven by university records. The presentation continued for another 30 minutes as Madison painted herself deeper into a corner of fraudulent claims and impossible promises. She quoted prices for services that had never been developed, promised deliverables that couldn't be created, and guaranteed results that would require capabilities data flow solutions had never possessed. Robert Pierce's contributions to the presentation were equally damaging. He endorsed every false claim Madison made and added his own exaggerations about the company's track record and client success stories. Father and daughter collaborated in creating a comprehensive record of fraudulent business practices while believing they were impressing a potential client. The trap was sprung when Thomas Bradley asked to see examples of the proprietary analytics platforms Madison had described. She confidently agreed to provide demonstrations and documentation, promising to deliver materials that didn't exist within 48 hours. We'll need to see actual data outputs from your customer journey architecture system and verification of the academic citations you mentioned, Thomas Bradley explained. Our board requires thorough due diligence before approving contracts of this magnitude. Madison's response sealed her fate completely. Rather than admitting that some materials might not be immediately available, she doubled down on her fraudulent claims and promised to provide everything TransGlobal requested. As the meeting concluded, Madison and Robert Pierce were practically glowing with excitement about the prospect of landing such a significant client. They had no idea that they had just provided law enforcement with comprehensive evidence of fraud, false credentials, and deceptive business practices. The investigation moved rapidly once the recorded evidence was processed. Detective Martinez had everything she needed to obtain warrants for Data Flow Solutions' financial records, client communications, and billing documentation. The fraud Madison and Robert had been committing for months was about to be exposed in its entirety. Within hours of the presentation, multiple law enforcement agencies began coordinating their investigation of Data Flow Solutions. The FBI became involved because some of the fraudulent billing involved clients in other states, making it a federal crime. The IRS opened their own investigation into potential tax fraud related to the false billing practices. I watched the investigation unfold from my cubicle, maintaining the appearance of normal work routine while knowing that everything was about to change dramatically. Madison spent the afternoon preparing fake materials for TransGlobal manufacturing, completely unaware that she was about to be arrested for multiple felonies. The final confrontation occurred 3 days later when investigators arrived at Data Flow Solutions with warrants to search the premises and arrest Madison Pierce for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Robert Pierce was simultaneously arrested at his home on related charges. Madison's reaction to being handcuffed in the lobby of Data Flow Solutions was everything I had hoped it would be. The arrogance and cruelty that had defined her treatment of me disappeared completely, replaced by panic and disbelief, as she realized that her world of inherited privilege and fraudulent success was collapsing around her. "This is a mistake!" she screamed as investigators led her away. "I'm Madison Pierce. My father owns this company. You can't do this to me." but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Madison's lies about her education were exposed when Northwestern University confirmed she had never graduated. The billing fraud was documented through months of financial records and client communications. Her recorded promises to Transglobal Manufacturing provided clear evidence of ongoing criminal intent. The immediate aftermath of the arrests transformed Dataflow Solutions completely. Patricia Walsh was terminated for her role in covering up Madison's misconduct. Several of Madison's college friends resigned rather than face questions about their knowledge of fraudulent practices. The company's reputation in the industry was permanently damaged by the scandal, but the personal vindication I felt was secondary to the broader justice that was finally being served. Harrison Industries received full restitution for their overcharges and became a witness in the criminal proceedings. Other clients who had been defrauded came forward as the investigation became public knowledge. Linda Walsh from Harrison Industries called me personally to offer a position as marketing director at their company. "Lorraine, we've been watching this situation develop and we're impressed with your integrity and professionalism throughout this whole mess. We'd love to have someone with your expertise and character leading our marketing efforts." The job offer came with a 40% salary increase, equity participation, and the kind of professional respect I had been fighting for at Dataflow Solutions. More importantly, it represented validation that my skills and experience had value that couldn't be destroyed by nepotism and corporate politics. Jake reached out to apologize for his behavior during my darkest period. "Lorraine, I realize now that I was completely wrong about the situation at Dataflow. I should have supported you instead of protecting my own interests. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I regret how I handled everything." His apology was sincere, but it came too late to repair our relationship. The experience had taught me that I needed people in my life who would stand by me during difficult times rather than abandoning me when supporting me became inconvenient for their careers. The criminal proceedings against Madison and Robert Pierce took 18 months to complete. Madison was ultimately sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy charges. Robert Pierce received a 5-year sentence and was ordered to pay full restitution to all clients who had been defrauded. Dataflow Solutions was restructured under new ownership with policies designed to prevent the kind of abuse that had flourished under the Pierce family's control. Several former employees who had been forced out by Madison's campaign were offered their positions back with improved compensation and workplace protections. But the most meaningful outcome was the personal growth I experienced throughout the ordeal. The systematic destruction of my professional life had forced me to discover reserves of strength, strategic thinking, and resilience that I hadn't known I possessed. Fighting back against Madison and her father had required me to develop skills and confidence that would serve me throughout my career. The life lesson that emerged from this experience was profound and transformative. Workplace bullying and corruption thrive when good people remain silent and accept injustice as inevitable. But individuals have more power than they realize when they're willing to document evidence, build strategic alliances, and fight back with intelligence and persistence. Madison's campaign against me had succeeded initially because I tried to fight back through normal channels and proper procedures. But corruption that operates through family connections and institutional power requires a different approach. Sometimes justice requires individuals to become their own advocates and investigators building the evidence and pressure that institutions are unwilling or unable to generate themselves. The most important realization was that integrity and competence ultimately triumph over inherited privilege and fraudulent credentials, but only when someone is willing to do the hard work of exposing the truth and holding corrupt people accountable for their actions. My new position at Harrison Industries became the foundation for a career that was built on legitimate achievements rather than family connections. Within 2 years, I was promoted to Vice President of Marketing and recognized as a leader in the technology sector. The skills I had developed during my fight against Madison served me well in legitimate business challenges that required strategic thinking and ethical leadership. The experience also taught me about the responsibility that comes with professional success. I implemented mentorship programs for young marketers, created reporting systems for workplace misconduct, and spoke publicly about the importance of ethical business practices in corporate environments. Madison Pierce learned that actions have consequences and that inherited privilege cannot protect someone from the legal system when their crimes are properly documented and prosecuted. Her 3 years in federal prison provided plenty of time to reflect on the difference between earning respect through competence and trying to command it through intimidation and fraud. Robert Pierce's downfall demonstrated that parents who enable their children's destructive behavior ultimately harm them more than helping them. His willingness to cover up Madison's incompetence and participate in her fraudulent schemes destroyed both their futures and violated the trust of employees and clients who had believed in Data Flow Solutions' integrity. The broader lesson for anyone facing similar workplace challenges is that documentation patience and strategic thinking can overcome even the most entrenched corruption and abuse. But fighting back requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to risk everything to expose the truth and demand justice. Sometimes the most important battles in our lives are the ones where we stand up for principles rather than just defending our immediate interests. My fight against Madison was ultimately about more than saving my own career. It was about proving that merit and integrity still matter in a world where corruption often seems rewarded and whistleblowers are punished. The victory was complete, the justice was thorough, and the life lesson will guide my professional decisions for the rest of my career. Sometimes good people have to be willing to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible and the consequences appear devastating. But when you fight with truth evidence and strategic intelligence, even inherited privilege and institutional protection cannot save corrupt people from the consequences of their actions. Justice may be delayed, but it cannot be denied when someone is brave enough to demand it and smart enough to make it happen. What experiences have you had with workplace bullying or unfair treatment? How did you handle the situation, and what would you do differently if you faced similar challenges today? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and personal triumph, and share it with anyone who might be dealing with similar workplace challenges. Thank you for listening, and remember that your integrity and competence are powerful weapons against corruption and injustice, but only when you're brave enough to use them strategically and persistently.